That's where we want to go. All right. Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's great to see you here this evening for this Radical Methodism class. This is a new thing apparently for Littleton UMC to have a class this way. It's great in that we are going to be able to record this as we are right now, and folks who are not able to join us tonight will be able to join us later. We're going to utilize these classes for asynchronous learning for folks who may find their way to us and want to learn something about our United Methodist story. This will be a way for us to refer them to that without having to have the class every time. And so this is great, and I appreciate you all pitching in to help us get this recorded. If you don't want to be a part of the recording, just don't talk, because the way this works is it'll show you on the recording when you say something. So there's that. Just etiquette for Zoom, just make sure and mute yourself when you're not talking, so that we don't get background noise from your end of things, from your residents. And if I mute you, it's nothing personal. It's just to try to clean up the audio for the recording. So, all right. Well, it's great to have you all on here tonight. Let's go ahead and kick in. I'm going to put some things in the chat along the way. There's some links to things that you all may be interested in as we go along. This class has been put together, the course has been put together by the General Commission on Archives and History of the United Methodist Church, and Ashley Boggin is the relatively new General Secretary for that, and you'll meet her in these videos that we're going to be watching. I think it's a really good resource for us. Many of you have been in classes on United Methodism before, and some of this stuff will be old hat for you, but I trust that there will be some things that will be a little bit new and will add to your United Methodism toolbox here over the course of these few weeks. So it should be good. We're going to start with the introductory video. It's just a couple of minutes where she talks about what we're going to be doing. And the format we'll have here is we'll watch a video or a segment of a video, and then we'll discuss for a few minutes. So you'll get a chance to share your thoughts about what you're seeing. And we'll go from there, and then we should be done. It'll be probably a little over an hour that it'll take us to get through this every week. So, all right, let me share this video with everyone. Here we are. Okay, where are we? It's not showing me what I need to see. That's not helpful. Okay. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. Sorry about this. It's not like I haven't done this before. Okay. There we go. Now you should see it. Is going to be easy, and there's an old saying, you can indict it in a sandwich. Really, I think the overwhelming concern will be Hey, sorry everybody. I wanted to, could you hear her? Okay, good. I'm glad I stopped it then. Yeah, there's a button that I need to push to make sure you can hear her. There we go. Share sound. All right, glad I thought of that, or we'd have been in trouble. Okay, let's try that again. Here we go.
Welcome to Radical Methodism. For those of you with a green thumb, you may see the word radical and know that it refers to a foundational part of a plant. The rest of you may think you've spotted a typo. Let's take a moment to understand why we're talking about root systems and what that has to do with Methodism, and especially with what it means to be United Methodist. I was first introduced to the word radical during a sermon series by Pastor Mark Scholl at the United Methodist Church in Madison, New Jersey. As someone who excels at growing weeds, the word radical was unfamiliar to me. A radicle is the first part of the seed to emerge and become the root system. It's the first hint that something is going to grow, to seek grounding, and it's the primary foundation to the future rooted system. It's that aspect of Methodism that we are going to explore in this series. What are the stories of the very beginning of Methodism, from before we were even rooted and grounded? We'll follow this radical beginning through its becoming entangled with the dirt and the nutrients of its surrounding soil. We'll follow the roots as they spread and the leaves and branches as they emerge from the ground above. We'll explore some of the fruit that has blossomed and some of the spoils of the plant as well. As we journey together through these radical moments, it is our hope that you are reminded of what it means to be United Methodist, to follow in our founder's footsteps, and to be in connection with one another.
All right. So as we get started, got a couple questions for us to ponder here. The first one is, as you come to this, what do you consider to be a distinguishing mark or characteristic of a United Methodist? Let's see if we can get a basic list started here, and you can either shout it out or you can share it in the chat if you know how to do that. Just raise your hand and you can unmute and you can share if you want to speak, or you can just type it in the chat. If you're not familiar with how to use the chat, should be a button at the bottom of your screen you can press, and that should show you the box over to the right side where you can type in things for us all to see. There's anybody else? Be a little bashful this evening. Nobody's got something? Social justice, caring and tolerant. Okay, why am I not seeing? Hold on.
Inclusion.
Inclusion, follower of Wesley. These are great. Yeah, respect for individual perspectives, not central dictating of beliefs, right? We're not a creedal denomination. Yeah.
That inclusion, that you can think different things but still be a Methodist. You can be quite conservative. You can be quite liberal in your thinking. We still welcome you. You're part of who we are.
Yes, yes. And we're actually going to hear a little bit of that and a little bit from one of Wesley's sermons called Catholic Spirit, where he talks about that. Potlucks. Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's good. Excellent. Okay. Next question then. Why do you think Wesley and his friends were given the name Methodist? What's your recollection of how that happened? We're going to hear something about that here in a minute. But
in England, they were very methodical in their belief and their worship, and that's how it became Methodism. And there's a whole lot more around that too.
Yes, exactly. Yep. The word methods kind of says it all, doesn't it? In a lot of ways. Yep, that's absolutely right. Yeah, use of discipline methods, followed methods like Bible study and worship, written methods. They had methods for worship. Right. Yes, we were methodical people. So how about this last one before we say a prayer and kind of kick into the first module of the class? Why are you United Methodist?
That was what I grew up with.
Okay. Yeah, for a lot of us, it is. It's what we grew up with.
That's part of why I am, but also when I compare it to some of the other doctrines, I still like, that we're inclusive, that we try different things. We don't throw anybody out because they believe something different. You can believe quite a bit of different things and still be a Methodist and still be accepted. We can talk about things.
Having grown up with it, I didn't see any reason to change because it was where I needed to be religiously.
Yeah.
Good. Parents, Tony says, closest church to where we lived when we got shamed into going to church. But it turned out to be a good fit, Sue says. That's great. Born a Methodist, like that, we're asked to figure out our beliefs for ourselves. Very good. Thanks, Harriet. All right. Excellent. Great start, everybody. Okay. So we're going to have a centering scripture every week and an opening prayer. The centering scripture for this week is from Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17. And it reads, "And that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love." In the opening prayer, many of you are aware that John Wesley is considered our founder, but Charles Wesley, his brother, was the poet of the family. And so we're going to begin with our opening prayer from his poem that turned into one of our hymns, Love Divine, All Loves Excelling. So let us pray. Love divine, all loves excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down, fix in us thy humble dwelling, all thy faithful mercies crown. Jesus, thou art all compassion, pure unbounded love thou art. Visit us with thy salvation, enter every trembling heart. Finish then thy new creation, pure and spotless let us be. Let us see thy great salvation, perfectly restored in thee. Changed from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love, and praise. Amen. All right, let's make sure everybody's getting in here. Okay, so we are going to go right into hopefully our first into our first module video, and this is where we'll begin. We'll watch a few minutes of it and then we'll pause and we'll have a few questions to discuss. So let's get started with session 1. Stop and share. The boxes are all checked.
Joining us today is Reverend Chris Heckert, who serves as senior pastor of Haddonfield United Methodist Church in Haddonfield, New Jersey. Thank you for being with us, Chris.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
John Wesley and a few others began to be called Methodist while at Oxford University. Now, John had already graduated, but was hanging around campus because his younger brother, Charles, was enrolled. John had absolutely no idea what he wanted to do with his life, and his brother, Charles, had just begun this pietistic, Bible-centric group on campus. Now, John, being John and the older brother, took it over from his younger brother, and the group quickly began to be ridiculed for their peculiar method of doing religion. They rose early, they studied intently, they prayed incessantly, they fasted, they talked openly about their spirituality, they visited the sick and the poor, and they held each other accountable to all of this. In other words, they centered their lives on faith as love acted out. And in the 18th century, this was weird. Most people, if they went to church or were welcomed into the sanctuary, sat down, listened to scripture, heard a sermon, and left. There was no action required of them except filling a seat in the pew on Sunday. And even then, this privilege was reserved for only a select few. Those who had access to the parish on Sunday, those who had the proper dress to enter the church, and those who had the luxury to take the Sabbath off from their labors. But they weren't immediately called Methodist. At first, this group was known as Sacramentarians, Bible Moths, and a personal favorite, the Holy Club.
The first of the intended insults, the name the Holy Club, makes you think of holier than thou or better than someone else. But instead of being lobbed at this group because that they were pious, they were simply following the Oxford Student Handbook in a rhythm of prayer and worship and taking the sacraments. It was when William Morgan, one of the first 4 original Methodists, went to visit debtors in the debtors' prison at the Bocardo jail as an expression of their faith, taking the gospel and witness seriously, as in Matthew 25, Jesus says, "Visit the sick and the imprisoned, and just as you have done to the least of these, you have done to me." So it was actually works of mercy and social engagement that garnered some of the first criticisms and insults.
And it's through this prison ministry that the group was first labeled Methodist as well. In the last few years, British Methodist historian Peter Forsyth has found what he believes to be the earliest written, published use of the term Methodist to describe John Wesley and his group. It was printed in the Fogg's Weekly newspaper in 1732 in reference to John's ministry with a particular inmate, a man named Thomas Blair. Mr. Blair was on death row for having a sexual relationship with another man. Wesley and his friend John Clayton believed that Blair was being victimized by his fellow inmates, and they sought to ensure his humane treatment. Clayton and Wesley took a particular interest in his trial, and they marshaled his evidence and sought to ensure that the case would convince any reasonable person of his innocence. The day of his trial, John Wesley rose at 4 a.m. and rode 12 miles on a horse to be present. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Blair was found guilty, but his life was spared. In order to be released from prison, he had to pay a small fine, but couldn't do so from behind bars. So John Wesley used his connections and raised it for him. Now, John Wesley was not concerned with the alleged crime that put Blair in prison. What concerned him was that Blair was being unfairly targeted and harassed. Wesley knew that was wrong. And that is why he came to his defense. In order to ensure that Mr. Blair felt worthy of God's love, of the love of neighbor, and especially the love of himself, Wesley was willing to risk all. Peter Forsyth describes this unrelenting, unconditional defense of all persons as the act of public witness that tipped the balance between the Methodists being tolerated and being castigated. And in that Fogg's Weekly Journal, the story printed about the Holy Clubbers' defense of Blair was the first time that the word Methodist was used in a public setting. So how did we get our name Methodist? By coming to the defense of those most outcast and most rejected in society, because the love of God compels us to reach out to those most in need.
Right. Did you find that interesting? That's a story I hadn't heard before she started telling this story in the last couple of years in this role. So how would you answer that question? How do we as United Methodists today live into John Wesley's method of doing religion? Doing religion. That's an interesting phrase too that they mentioned. How do you respond to what you heard in those first 5 minutes of this video? Any of those phrases?
It comes down to the social action for a large part of that. Because if that's how it started in a prison, that was certainly social action. Okay. Along with that, I've been reading a book about English history, a 350-page book, And the author there described the Church of England as lackadaisical and doing nothing at the time.
Yeah, so doing religion would have been quite the change then, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating to think that, the expectation, when you go to church today, we stand and sit and we sing and we participate to some degree in what is going on in worship, but they didn't do that, right? They didn't do that at the time. All right, so we got some responses here. Participating in the justice team is one way that we do our religion. Mission trip. We support the poor, rejected, and marginalized members of society. Very good. Our outreach programs for the community. Angela, yeah.
I thought it was interesting that the Holy Club, people were mocked for their practices. And I think there is some of that. We tend to don't want to talk about our faith and talk about, Bible verses. I was in South Africa and there was a lot more openness about being a Methodist. It just seemed that here it's not something we talk about. Especially my husband's not a Christian, and it's difficult to balance that, to be a Christian, and yet you live two lives in a way.
Yeah, interesting. And interesting that's kind of what they were experiencing, isn't it? Yeah, if you start taking it seriously in a way that's visible, that's obvious, that people notice, then people start to take notice, and you may start to get some feedback in different ways, right? Yeah, interesting. All right, any other thoughts about that method? Charlie, you got some?
Yeah, it reminded me of the line from A Christmas Carol when old Scrooge says, "Well, are there no workhouses?" We do things now as a matter of course that didn't used to be done. People were not cared for, and I think we've lost, although we do it, we've lost the uniqueness of it over the years. It's really that was a radical movement.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Hmm. Yeah, and we'll I think we're going to get into a little bit of that tonight too. All right, why don't we go on to the next segment? Anybody have anything burning that you'd like to say? Phyllis, you're not muted. Did you want to say something, or were you just not muted?
I beg your pardon.
So you just weren't muted. I wasn't sure if you wanted to say something.
I need to be muted.
Okay.
I'm kind of giving this a run, Reverend Chris, because I'm not sure how much I can hear, so I won't be talking.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks, Phyllis. That helps. Okay. Great. Well, let's move on to the next segment and see what else she has to share with us here.
John Wesley describes 3 rises to the Methodist movement. But those aren't really the beginning of the movement. They are more of the steps Wesley takes in finding a way to live into his peculiar call. Methodism truly begins in Bristol in 1739. But before we get there, we need to know some of the context of the 18th century England. It's funny, today's society is not that different from Wesley's day. Many of the people in the 18th century might have identified as nuns and duns. They were tired of the institutional church because it did not meet their everyday needs, and it refused to change in order to do so. People were expected to pay taxes to support the local church, but they didn't see the local church as truly supporting their needs. The national landscape was broken up into parishes, and for centuries the parish system had functioned reasonably well. However, all of this came to an end during the Industrial Revolution. Transitioning from rural farming and pastoral economies, millions of people abandoned their long-held family lands in search of seemingly lucrative industrial jobs. As a result, mass migrations exploded across England and onto the North American colonies, and the parish system quickly collapsed under the stress of millions of people moving, and those people began to suffer for the lack of support systems. This provided critical opportunities for those early Methodists to evangelize and expand as they filled in the gaps through care of the poor and the disenfranchised through the establishment of hospitals and schools. And from the very beginning, the itinerant commission demanded that we go to the most collapsed places where life is most vulnerable and most disordered. And this is where the city of Bristol comes into play.
Bristol is an important location for the people called Methodist. A seaport town, Bristol was key to the British slave trade. Also known as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, Bristol had industries that produced everything from chocolate to soap to cannons. Bristol was overcrowded and overpopulated. Its medieval walls had been constructed to contain about 5,000 people, and yet with immigration and people coming to work, its population had exploded to 40,000 people. Without sanitation systems and services, it had been known as the dirtiest city in England and even in the Western world. The second largest city in England, behind London, Bristol, like other cities, had a massive gap between the wealthy and the poor. The industries and the mines were owned by a few wealthy families, while the rest of the residents worked just for pennies and lived below the poverty line. But it was here that John Wesley came and built the first Methodist building, a preaching house known as the New Room. But why did John Wesley come to Bristol in the first place?
Wesley was called to Bristol in March of 1739 by his longtime frenemy, George Whitefield. Whitefield had been in Bristol for a while, preaching to ever-increasing crowds, and he calls on John to assist. John arrives on March 31st and was astounded to find Whitefield preaching in the fields. He writes in his journal, "I could scarcely reconcile myself at first to this strange way of preaching in the fields." Now, up until this point, John had followed the preaching standards of his day. He continued and wrote, "I had been all my life, till very lately, so tenacious of every point relating to decency and order, that I should have thought the saving of souls almost a sin if it had not been done in a church." By April 2nd, only 3 days after his arrival in Bristol, he does something he thought he never would. He wrote, "At 4 in the afternoon, I submitted to be more vile, and proclaimed in the highways the glad tidings of salvation, speaking from a little eminence in the ground adjoining to the city, to about 3,000 people." Now, the current director of global relationships at John Wesley's New Room in Bristol brilliantly states that while John Wesley's heart was strangely warmed in London, it was set afire in Bristol. Within 3 days of being in Bristol, John Wesley's entire framework of how to preach, where to preach, what is proper versus what is missionally prophetic or even vile, is wholly overthrown. And this experience shook his foundational understanding of normativity, of acceptability, and replaced them with a desire to follow the Spirit of God and meet people wherever they were. This is where the movement of the people called Methodist begins.
All right. So this John Wesley, who was so big into method and kind of discipline and following rules and all of that, ends up in Bristol with all of this that we just heard about. What struck you? What was something new that you heard that you may not have known before about these beginnings?
Well, he used to love decency and order, and then he realized that's not gonna be helpful. Sometimes you have to
Yeah.
go where there's suffering and the most difficult places.
And
Yeah.
I had never heard that before, that it changed when he went to Bristol, and instead of having his little group and doing the good deeds and things like that, all of a sudden he's out there preaching to anybody who'd come and listen. I mean, there were no rules about who could come, I'm sure. I mean, if you came, you would hear the preaching. Yeah, that's way different.
Well, the fact that when he finally did submit to being more vile and preaching outside, 3,000 people showed up that night. I mean, that's kind of Jesus preaching on the hillside kind of numbers, right? It's amazing. Yeah. What else struck you? Are there any similarities between our church today and Wesley's movement at that time? Or maybe better question is, are there similarities between the church today and the church that Ashley described of Wesley's day? What was the church like in their day that she described?
Well, you had to
Were the people really happy with it?
clothes. You had to have the right clothes, and not everyone was accepted, and you had to have transportation, so it barred lots of people.
Yeah, yeah. And said that you paid taxes that went to the church. I mean, you had a national church there, right? So your taxes would go to that church, but did people get anything back out of those taxes? No, right? That was part of the frustration, that they poured into it, but they didn't feel like they were getting anything back out of it. Does that sync up with the way we think about the church today, do you think, at all? What's your sense of the parallel, if there is one?
Well, that may be true for parts of the world, that there's still obligations to the church, even though you'd have no, you're not involved. I mean, I hear about that in Europe a lot, which may not be true, but that's what I've heard. But I think there's an expectation, at least in my experience in the Methodist Church, that people get something back from it, emotional support and community support. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is different not being a national church, right? I mean, in some ways that really helps us in our system, right? Where we are separate from that. So to be a part of who we are, there has to be some appeal, some draw. You're not just automatically a part of it, right? That's an interesting thing. All right, some notes we have here. Deb says, didn't know that he felt so tied to the church building. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that was very, for a priest, an Anglican priest of the Church of England, you only preach from a pulpit, and only one that you were authorized to preach from. So yeah, he felt very tied to the church building. There was a story we may hear at some point about him, where he was not allowed to get in the pulpit. He ended up jumping up on a tombstone in the graveyard to preach from. Let's see. Pat says there was a large immigration movement going to Bristol. A lot of wealth versus poor, very similar to what is happening today. Yeah. Interesting to hear about that migration that was going on at the time, isn't it? That the social upheaval with the Industrial Revolution was shifting where people were needing to live, to be able to find a living, make a living, when the parish system broke down there. Interesting, huh? All right, let's see. And Phyllis shares Methodist attention to the commonest people followed on from the nonconformist threat to the social order during the English Civil War. When the Church of England regained political power, every alternative was regarded as political threat. Yeah, every alternative was regarded as political threat. Yep. Yeah, anything that ran counter to the Church of England, since the Church of England was part of the state, there were a lot of threats perceived whenever anything challenged it. Charlotte and I watched a period television series can't remember the name of it exactly, but one of the noteworthy things for us was that there were Methodists in it, who were in that portrayal, at least, were folks who were preaching in the streets and who were connected with the people in the local communities, and they really were perceived as a threat by the local priest of the Church of England. So that's a fascinating thing too. All right. Well, this is an interesting question for you to think about, if not answer here. One of the things she mentioned was about John Wesley, and that Bristol was really where he kind of caught a fire for the work that the Methodists were doing at the time. What sets your heart afire today as a United Methodist? Is there anything that gets you excited and motivated today? You've already listed a few in the chat there.
Even that hymn, your opening hymn, I love that hymn. It's just
Yeah.
beautiful. Some of his hymns, and I love John Wesley. Yeah.
Definitely. Yep. Love divine, all loves excelling. All right. Well, keep that question in your heart and your mind. Well, that's an important one for us as Methodists to keep coming back to. All right, let's watch our next segment here.
Throughout the 1740s, John was trying to reconcile with various persons who had long influenced his faith, but who disagreed with his understanding of universal salvation, or this idea that Christ died for all persons. A clear example of this theology is in his sermon entitled Catholic Spirit. Now, the main point of that sermon can be summarized with one quote. But although a difference of opinions or modes of worship may prevent an entire external union, yet need it prevent our union in affection. Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike. May we not be of one heart, though we are not of one opinion. Without all doubt we may. Herein all the children of God may unite, notwithstanding these smaller differences. They remaining as they are, they may forward one another in love and in good works. These words ring true to us today. The United Methodist Church is not concerned with differences of theology, of social status, of economic status, or of political affiliation. We, as United Methodists, believe that all persons are worthy of the love of God, unconditionally, without change of how God made them or how they express the love of God.
Sorry about that. I'm having to figure out how my cursor is moving here. All right. So Catholic Spirit is one of those sermons that Wesley preached that you hear referred to all the time. And this line is the one that you hear the most. Though we not think alike, may we not love alike. Now, that's already some of the things that you all have already shared here this evening kind of reflect that you do recognize that as part of our Methodist way of being with one another. But how does that strike you to hear it explicitly said by Wesley himself?
I think this part of it comes true for everything that we've said so far. My reason for being a Methodist. Years ago, I was wanting to sing at a friend's wedding. And because I was not Catholic, I was not allowed in the building. And I thought to myself, that's not right. We're all supposed to be welcome at God's table and in God's house. And so the church I was going to, I endured until I graduated from college. and then kind of lapsed away from religion of all kinds, be thinking that that was the way everybody behaved. And my church did not do a whole lot more than that. You were not allowed if you didn't behave yourself. You know, the fear of God was put in you if you danced or if you smoked or drank or whatever. And you were not going to go to heaven if that happened. And I knew that was not part of the Bible's teaching. So that's what kept me out of that. And then we went to a Methodist church, and there were all kinds of people dressed all different ways. And the sermon was mostly about how we can all work together and be together and be part of God's world.
Yeah, that's great, Pat. Thank you.
And we're doing even more now with inclusion of all personalities and all behaviors and social and economic situations, everything. I think it's wonderful the way our church does it.
Yeah, very good. All right, what I'm trying to do here is to get the link into the chat so that if you are interested, you can click on it and go read the whole sermon yourself if you like. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Okay, there's a couple versions there. One is a literal printing of it. The other has been modified a little bit to make the English a little easier to read. So that's the second link there. Some things you all have said. Dan says it's uplifting. Sue says, I didn't know the aspect that we can think differently went all the way back to Wesley. I assumed that aspect grew over the years since then. Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's a nice thought, but it makes me wonder why we recently split. Yeah, Harriet, that's good. It's interesting that we come from this tradition where he shares this thought with us, and that we did end up deciding that we just could not overcome that difference of opinion, especially around the human sexuality question. But it's a powerful reflection, Harriet. Thank you for that.
Reverend Chris, it's also to do with the rules in the countries, isn't it? There's some African countries, they won't allow that and don't tolerate, some behavior that Western countries do. So it was like a practical split. And I think that helps to realize that there's sometimes good splits and bad splits. And that's probably a logical one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about Africa. It was very much here.
And
too.
here, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. But I think it's fascinating to think about other things that we encounter, and folks in our church family, folks here on the screen who think very differently about some things, but that we find a way to join together at the communion table, to join together in mission with one another, and to move beyond some of those things that would pull us apart. And he does recognize it. I mean, I skimmed through again that Catholic Spirit sermon, and he recognizes that if it we can hold some of these opinions, he talks about them as opinions, very closely, right? And they can be very important to us. If they weren't important to us, they wouldn't matter, right? So many of them really matter because they are important to us, and that kind of highlights, the distinctiveness of our Methodist tradition in being able to love alike. All right, let's see what's next.
I guess I would say with that, I think the splits come when some group will not allow others to have the opinions that they have, that they want to enforce rules that the other side feels, no, this is basic tenets, and I think that's part of where the church split came. Is I think we tried and tried and tried, but the other side would never allow us to believe the way we believed and have that be part of Methodism. They had to have it the way they saw it, and I think that's where many of the splits have come. It's when one group has to go off in its own direction and not allow the rest of the people to have their own understandings and work together.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the things we learned in the human sexuality conflict that we had was that you couldn't just say this was an opinion and go on about your business, that there were things that your church was asked to do. And and so that gets at what you're talking about, right? That these are things that it's hard just to kind of not show up that day, for church. So these things go deep. All right, so we'll go to the next video. But Deb says, part of our tradition of being able to think differently but love alike seems to be related to the notion of unconditional grace. Yeah, I think that grace in our story and in Wesley's way of salvation, I think, is a huge part of this. Deb, thank you very much. All right, let me get us going on the next segment here.
Methodism moved from a series of methods of discipleship to becoming an actual movement when a few Christians in London asked Mr. Wesley to meet with them to help them work out their salvation. And Mr. Wesley, of course, met with them, but in a couple weeks' time, the group had grown and grown, and this was the birth of the first of the Methodist societies. The only requirement for membership would be a desire to flee from the wrath to come. These groups would meet and pray and would do soul tending and also would sing hymns. The societies would grow. Now, a few years earlier, when Wesley was traveling in Savannah, Georgia, he had learned a method of soul tending in small communities from the German Moravians. And they called their small communities bands, or the German word bond. Methodist bands and the larger societies would become a model through which Methodism would grow. Eventually, they would be broken up into classes or class meetings in smaller groups, with the societies meeting quarterly. This method, intentional Christian community, growing in grace, watching over one another in love, through bands, class meetings, and societies, would spread throughout England, into Ireland, Scotland, and even in the American colonies.
Mission is at the heart of what it means to be Methodist. John Wesley did not devise a new system of theology. His ingenuity was in his ability to design systems of mission. He was able to provide, rather readily, places and spaces that met basic needs of everyday people. His preaching houses, like the New Room, weren't just rooms where people gathered to hear a sermon. They were mission posts. They were libraries. They served as medical dispensaries. They were places for trade, for communities to gather, and for people to organize to do mission out in the world.
All right. So this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and we'll be doing more with at our church coming months. But interesting that as they got more people involved, that those discipleship methods that those early fellows were so intent upon turned into a movement as people began to catch on to this. So what strikes you about that shift from just some guys getting together and keeping journals to something that became a movement? What do you think was at the heart of that?
Well, I think it was just the involvement of the people. I remember a good friend from my college days. She was a good Catholic, went through Catholic schools, And she said, you know, we were not allowed to read the Bible. We were just supposed to take what the priest said as an interpretation. And the fact that so many people became involved was quite different at the time, I understand.
Yeah, I mean that leads right into that, how they described the bands and what became classes, class meetings, and their societies, the different ways that they kind of subdivided. How familiar have you all been with those things over the years? Um, have those come up in your church at all? Those ideas of bands and classes and what those were about?
Well, when I was in South Africa, every Thursday night, I went to a Bible study, and it's so special that time because the leader, I think she had 6 children, and she was just an amazing person. So it makes me sad to think of it. It's just amazing, the fellowship and the sharing, the caring and the growing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what the bands and the classes were about. The bands were smaller groups of similar social standing. So it'd be all young men or all older women or that sort of thing, and they'd be smaller, half a dozen people maybe. Um, Eventually, classes developed that were larger and more diverse. Um, Maybe a dozen or so people would meet in the class, but they were all for support and accountability. What you described there, Angela. So both support, so just helping you get through life together, right? But also accountability to say, how'd you do this week on your journey? And they actually had a list. Wesley had a list of 22 questions that they could go through as a group. Some of them very personal, and some of them kind of intense. Thinking about your life and what it was about and what you were doing or not doing. As you were doing your religion, right? But that was very very much a part of it. And what we hear about those is that you would have to go to your class meeting in order to get your ticket to go to the preaching meeting, the society meeting later. You had they recognized that you had to be a part of this intentional group, intentional process of following, because they had seen, well, like we heard earlier, they had seen what happened in the larger Church of England when there was no accountability, when there was no method to the madness, so to speak. Right? Let's see, Sue. Let's see here. So, yeah, Amy mentions the way station. Harriet, I think John Wesley came up with the idea of Sunday school. Yeah, I'm no, he didn't come up with Sunday school, but they education was very much a part of what those Methodists were about. Part of what they were saying there, education and medicine and all sorts of things that they were involved with in those Methodist buildings. Talking about the new room, that building in Bristol, and there were other places around England that were like that. They became mission outposts, way stations for mission that happened. They weren't just a place that you would gather on Sunday for church kind of thing. They expected everybody to go to their parish church in the Church of England, and they could come to the preaching meetings there at the Methodist buildings. But there was so much more that went on in those places. Sue says, sounds like a version of small groups. Yeah, very much. Many Sunday school classes view themselves as a form of small groups, but perhaps not with the formal follow-up questions. Commitment and accountability are things which make people cringe, but they are means to an end. Yeah, that's really true. We get a little anxious, a little nervous about that idea, don't we? But many of us have had an experience similar. Sue, you mentioned the Sunday school classes, at Littleton. Many of those classes have been very much like this for the people who are a part of them. I think one of the things that I will push some in coming months is this idea that we do discipleship on purpose. and that's part of what those early Methodists recognized, that this is not something that just happens kind of out of thin air or by accident, that you have to pay attention to it. And I think there are what they discovered, our early Methodist friends discovered, was that those small groups were vital to doing it on purpose. Rather than being a scary thing, they became kind of what Angela was describing, something that was integral to people's lives. One of the things that you hear often out of those early Methodist class and band meetings was that this is how a big alcohol problem in their culture was dealt with by these early Methodist groups, bands, and classes, that they helped one another to stop spending their money on alcohol. And so one of the things that happened was the social standing of some of those early Methodists rose, because they were actually putting their resources into the lives of their families and their communities, rather than into supporting a habit of some kind. Made big changes, right? Which became problematic in its own way, but what was an extraordinary outgrowth of their life together that they lived. So,
Chris, if you look at the history of the Sunday school classes
Yeah.
at our church, Crusaders started out, they got a Sunday school group together because their kids were all the same age, and they stayed together and they supported each other. I mean, it was, do you need a ride to church as they got older and so forth? You've got fantastic fellowship. You've got friends in faith. Seekers was an offshoot because they wanted a more liberal, more in-depth and studying of books and so forth. So it reached out to the needs of different people. And it's been a good thing. It's been a good support.
Yeah.
But I know that we have been concerned that they seem to be the closed groups. And I don't think they are, but I think it kind of feels that way if people look around and they walk into a classroom for Sunday school and everybody knows everybody, and they're kind of the outsider walking in, it's kind of like, okay, I'll just kind of quietly back out of the room. But we have, I mean, that's what built our church up. That Crusaders class, if anything needed to be repaired, they would raise money. And, if there was a shortage for the youth going on a mission trip, what do you need? And that type of thing. So, and I see it with the other Sunday school classes doing some of the same thing.
Yeah, very much, very much. Yeah, I think there are definitely some parallels, right? And it'd be interesting and we will look into what are the parallels between what we have now at our church and what those early Methodists were doing, and what are some differences between what we have now at our church and what those early Methodists were doing, and how can we kind of maybe grow what we're doing and develop what we're doing and evolve maybe into something more, right? All right, let's see here. What's the time? Yep, let's go on to the last, I think it's the last section.
While John Wesley gets most of the credit for birthing the Methodist movement, the truth is, without his younger brother Charles, there would be no people called Methodists. Along with being the co-founder of the Holy Club, or the early Methodists in Oxford, Charles gave the movement its backbone of theology through song. Charles penned over 7,000 hymns in his day, and some of the early publications of the Methodists were hymnals of Charles' hymns, although John would add to them and in the writings of the preface. Charles gives us some of the most famous hymns even sung today. Hark the herald angels sing, Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing, And are we yet alive, and love divine, all loves excelling.
Women were also key radical figures in the early Methodist movement. Later in life, John Wesley began to license women to preach. He did so after wrestling with Scripture and using his own experience of seeing the Spirit of God work in and through women in a way that was no different than that of men. His mother, Susanna, famously preached from her kitchen when John was only 8 years old. And so women preaching and having an idea of religious authority was not necessarily a novel idea for him. Sarah Crosby and Mary Bosanquet opened an orphanage and a school in 1763, which also served as a center of Methodist activity. They led prayer services and spoke from a place of religious authority to crowds of more than 200 men and women. Crosby recalled, quote, "I saw it impracticable to meet all of these people by way of speaking to each individual. I therefore gave out a hymn and prayed and told them of what the Lord had done for myself, persuading them to flee from all of sin." And she was unapologetic with her preaching. Quote, "I do not think it wrong for women to speak in public, provided they speak by the Spirit of God." When women did preach, Wesley did not remove them from their positions. Most of the time, he would write a letter reminding them to exhort or encouraging them to read one of his sermons. Another early Methodist female preacher was Sarah Ryan. Sarah Ryan was particularly special to John as she reminded him of his younger sister, Hetty. Sarah had been married 3 times, abused and abandoned by each of her husbands. Seen as an untouchable woman to most of English society, John took pity upon her and gave her a post as manager of the New Room in Bristol. It is here that Sarah Ryan embodied her ministerial call as preacher, as manager, and one of the main organizers of the centers of the Methodist movement. The radical preaching of women did not last beyond Wesley's lifetime. After his death in 1791, both Methodism in Britain and in the United States began to limit women's official roles as preachers and leaders of the movement. And yet, while women would not earn the right to a preaching license until the end of the 19th century and full ordination rights until 1956, women still challenged the status quo and continued to push the boundaries of womanhood and of Methodism, all to ensure that the love of God could reach the most people.
Right. So, do our modern day United Methodists still push the boundaries the way John Wesley did back in the day? What do you think?
I think some do, like having women, gay superintendents and accepting gay couples and marriages. I mean, that's partly acceptable, isn't it? In a lot of situations, but not all. That's a big step, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we still, to some degree, have the Catholic spirit. So you'll find a number of the churches that I served as superintendent for are still very conservative, and still would you would not find the same kind of openness that you would at other churches in our annual conference around those matters. But we're still in it together, right? So I think that in and of itself is maybe a little unusual today in such a polarized culture that we live in. Anything else jump out at anybody? So that language of being more vile, did everybody get that when she was talking about Wesley and how he used that language about, for him it was outdoor preaching, right? What does that look like for us, do you think? Are we willing to be more vile in order to spread the love of God today? And what would that look like for us, do you think?
We saw a lot of it in Break Bread. A lot of acceptance of everyone and everyone coming there, getting an acceptance of each other with their I noticed that
Yeah.
Harriet had mentioned something about why did Methodist Church split?
Right. Yeah, I think we said something about the split. Yeah, I think you're right, Pat. Break Bread is a great example of Littleton United Methodist Church reaching out and being there for people who don't have a voice, who are not prominent, who are not, not socially acceptable for a lot of people. I think that is one of the ways that we are, as Methodists, living into our heritage, right? When we do that, and I think for us always to be looking for those ways to be pulled out of our comfort zones. The way Wesley was, I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, she talked about his frenemy, George Whitefield. They were rivals during their lifetimes and during their ministries. But the fact that he could learn from his rival, something that enabled him to spread the gospel more effectively in the world, and what that turned into, right? And so for us to always be saying to ourselves, it's kind of one of those intentional, purposeful checks on ourselves. How are we willing to be more vile this year, right? What does it look like in 2025 or 2026 to be more vile for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the good news of God in the world? I think that's a great filter for us to put ourselves through. Patricia says we hide our religion behind our walls. I think we need to do more outreach. Yeah, I think that's important. Pat says, I don't think we're pushing the envelope as a religious organization. We move in so many directions that it's hard to be focused on the social issues. Yeah, yeah. Well, I love how many different voices and conversations happen in the life of our church. And I think it's incumbent on us to always pay attention to how those things extend beyond just conversation into doing something. And we'll be having this conversation next Sunday after worship about Break Bread and what may be the next chapter of that outreach for us as a church. So, all right. Well, this is great. Well, I appreciate you all attending this evening. Anybody have anything kind of burning on your heart or mind that you would like to share before we wrap up this evening? All righty. Well, we are going to, this has been recorded, and so Tara will get this put up online. So for folks who weren't able to join us this evening, they'll be able to share in this conversation. So grateful for you attending this evening, and we'll be doing this again for the next several weeks. And so we look forward to seeing you all again. Until then, take good care. One way I like to finish these is for everybody, I'm going to say a prayer, and then for everybody to unmute, and it'll be this cacophony, this Pentecost kind of cacophony of everybody's voices saying good night and God bless, and we'll see you next time, okay? So let's start with a prayer, and then everybody unmute and say good night. Gracious God, we thank you so much for this time, and I'm so grateful for these siblings in faith and for the conversation we were able to share in this evening. So grateful for Ashley and Chris and for their leadership of this course. Pray that you would help us to be a people who are willing to be methodical and vile in all the ways that it takes to spread your good news and the good news of your love and of your kingdom and of your kingdom in this world that is in such dire need of it. Come from a great story. Help us to be worthy of carrying that story forward. It's in your son's name we always pray. Amen. All right, everybody, say good night.
Everybody.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.